speakers are ready.
Well, let's get the, maybe if we can get started, we'll just do introductions real quick, then we'll go to you, Wade, to start off our meeting. Welcome, everyone. We'll start off with introductions. My name's Kevin Hansen. We'll go to my left.
Julie Bommelman, City of Fargo Transit Director.
Matt Peterson, City of Fargo Assistant Transit Director.
Lori Van Beek, Moorhead Transit Manager.
Jordan Smith, Fleet Facilities Manager for MapBus.
Taryn Haig, Assistant Transit Planner and Marketing Specialist for Moorhead.
Sean Kroll, Mobility Manager, MapBus.
Sage Thornbrew, City of Fargo Transit Planner.
Michael Maddox, MetroCog.
Paul Greenland, Valley Senior Services.
Steve Fox from Minnesota State University, Moorhead.
Jackie Moss from Concordia College.
Rick Stevens, NDSU.
Larry Weil, City of West Fargo.
Well,
Sarah Watson Curry, Moorhead City Council.
do you have? But we've got
Way more important.
Yeah, way more important, yes.
Waiting for him to introduce himself, yeah.
Well, again, welcome, everyone. Our first item on the agenda is a presentation from Mr. Klein on a MapBus transit facility study. So Julie and Laura, do you want to introduce the study and turn over to Wade?
Oh, certainly. Wade Klein is here representing KLJ. They are the consultants that did the MapBus transit facility study. And what you'll hear quite a bit in detail, no doubt, from Wade. Basically, what we're looking at in a nutshell is existing facilities and short, long-term use of those, and are we looking at expansion? And how is that going to look as far as administration and any of our operators, where they're going to be, and how our fleet will look? So we took into account a lot of things, but the main focus was West Acres, the GTC, the MTG, which is our administrative building, and where we store our fleet. And we looked at the Marriott, and then we looked at different levels of lesser hubs, if you want to call them that. So, nutshell. Lori? Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Well, appreciate the opportunity. I wish the technology were working. Otherwise, I can talk through it this way. I think Julie gave a great background on the report. I think they're working on the technology here. Gave a great background on the report. I think, you know, one of the things to keep in mind is why do we do this study? What was the purpose? I mean, you know, the Metro Transit Garage was built not that long ago, and basically within 10 or 12 years is kind of near capacity. And I know a number of, you know, MAP board members have been around long enough to remember when that was constructed, so it's already kind of full. You know, the Ground Transportation Center is 40 years old practically, and so, you know, looking at some improvements there. You know, definitely some transit level hub needs in the city of Moorhead and the city of Dilworth, some changes happening, you know, as Moorhead has expanded. And I think one of the primary reasons that we did the study all together in the beginning was to address some issues at the West Acres Transit Hub, which has been there for many, many years, and the mall's interest in looking at a different alternative for where that facility would be relocated. So the front end of what we did was really to look at a lot of stop level analysis. I mean, not only did we want to look at some of the larger infrastructure needs, GTC, MTG, we also took a look at, you know, where are people using the system, what are the accommodations that we're providing for those users of the MapBus system, you know, not only at the big stops, but right down to the stop level. I mean, do we have the appropriate kind of infrastructure there for sheltering, for lighting, for heating, for ADA access? So we went through a long process of identifying where we think those needs were. I have some great graphics that would be great to look at. But we really looked at ridership and boarding patterns, but also took a step back and basically said, you know, where in our communities do we have what we call transit-intensive corridors? I mean, where are people using the buses now? Where are things changing? You know, you think about First Avenue, Center Avenue, and Moorhead, we're seeing a lot of new investment and development. So when we start to look at those corridors, you know, do we need different and evolving kinds of transit infrastructure in those areas to make sure that, you know, as you will see transit increase, as densities increase, you know, do we have the appropriate infrastructure, or are we at least giving ourselves a footprint to do that? There's a number of places on the Fargo and West Fargo side as well. When you think about, you know, sections of 32nd Avenue between University and 25th Street, University Drive between 13th Avenue and I-94. So lots of these little transit-intensive corridors, we're like, hey, a lot of people are using transit in these areas now. We're projecting that there will be more transit usage in the future. So we developed tiers of stops, and for each level of stop, we developed different kinds of infrastructure that we thought we wanted to use in those areas. How's that technology coming back there? Yes, no? Okay, thanks. So we looked at a lot of different levels of, and if we get to the graphics, I'll back up a little bit. Two areas that we looked at in specific on the Moorhead side. Number one was the M-State campus. Of course, the colleges are huge partners. So we looked at some of the dynamics on the M-State campus, and we developed some options to develop what we would call a level B bus stop out on 24th Avenue. We also did the same thing at Dilworth, Walmart. Again, identifying these areas where we're seeing a lot of boarding and a lot of not only existing but future usage to try to identify some potential improvements for those areas. So we do have some graphics that would show that, but I think talking about it is all we can really do at this point. So we really did a lot of work looking at kind of the stop level, A's being those bigger places like the GTC and West Acres, all the way down to just the typical places where somebody is going to get on the bus. So I can back up here just a second. So this, obviously at this scale, it's difficult to see, but, back to my original point, I mean, we looked at the overall metro system and kind of looked at boarding patterns, and based on those boarding patterns, what we tried to do, is we developed 4 levels of stop. An A stop, which is really your most significant stops, GTC, West Acres. The B levels, like I had mentioned, places like the Marriott, potentially M-State, Dilworth, and there's a couple others out there. C stops and then D stops. So that kind of set the stage for how we would develop some infrastructure expectations. So when we looked at A-level stops, we developed some very concept level understanding of what those facilities might look like in terms of features and amenities. What are some thresholds that we would want to establish before we would make those kinds of investments in those facilities. Did the same thing with level B stops, understanding, what is our minimum number of routes that we would expect to come into there, number of buses per hour, looking at boarding. So when I was talking about, potentially M-State, Marriott, Dilworth, Walmart, some of those other Bs that are out there, I mean, those are pretty heavily trafficked areas. I mean, you're looking at 300 or more boardings a day. So those are larger circles on the map. So in some cases, as I mentioned, we looked specifically at some potential improvements. This is the M-State campus on the south end of town. And so you can see 24th Avenue on the north is where we had talked for many years about maybe potentially trying to locate a facility there, and that's based on what we might need not only today but in the future as Moorhead continues to add service. So looking at a concept layout, these are just some 3D renderings of how that would kind of fit into the campus area and to the environment around it. Certainly something folks are always interested. What will it look like? And it looks pretty neat. Same thing at Walmart in Dilworth. It's certainly an East End hub for metro area transit. Right now, not an ideal situation with buses kind of coming through the parking lot, stopping on the north side of Walmart. Those of you who've used Walmart, kind of that area is pretty congested. So we looked at, kind of coming up with an option to use the north end of the building a little bit more structured, kind of get some more decent facilities in there, account for, where buses need to park and transfer. And so these are helpful as we, try to look at understanding what those mean. For a lot of our hubs, we tried to identify some specific costs for the building and the site costs. The site costs were specific to those locations. The building costs were more generalized based on the level of stop that we had identified. So really just identifying some some expectations and then what it would cost to implement those expectations. The final stop, a C-level stop, again, that's anywhere we're saying there should be a shelter, and there's a lot of flexibility there. I mean, we use the 25 as a boarding threshold, but we know there's a lot of considerations for where we might want that number to be lower. I mean, if you have elderly or ADA or other situations, if you're kind of in the middle of nowhere, but you've got a lot of ridership, you would have those kind of considerations. And one of the things we did is we worked with some architects on this just to kind of help us, sketch these things out. It's tough sometimes for the public to understand, what do you mean when you talk about a bus stop. So for a lot of these levels, we did some, some more generic, layouts of what that might look like. And then in the case of a sea-level stop, here we had the architect kind of just drop a stop in at, if you can envision, University Drive and 14th Avenue South. Again, thinking of those transit-intensive corridors, how does transit fit in as we, redevelop and reinvest in our neighborhoods and communities? And so this kind of just gives you an example of how you kind of get a stop in there. And, it looks good, looks sharp. That's what we want transit to look like. We want it to be a real positive feature within the community. As I mentioned on the front end, one of the bigger areas that we looked at was the West Acres Shopping Center, which is in the kind of the right-hand side of the graphic there. All the buses that use the West Acres Transit Hub transfer on the Roger Maris end on the south wing there of the mall. If you've entered there, it's near the mall offices. That facility was built for about $150,000 in 2003, 2004. Based on things that are changing with the retail industry, based on the way the mall is changing, they reached out to the city of Fargo and MapBus and said, could we maybe look at some options to relocate or look at some different locations for where you transfer. We did do a very preliminary look at some other areas off the mall site. None of those, kind of stood out as being particularly all that beneficial. Another concern we had if you went completely off the mall site would be, you're still going to have people who probably want to go to the mall, so how many buses are you still going to be driving into and right up next to the mall anyways? So as we went through the evaluation, we thought, kind of brought us back to some options in and around the mall. We looked at a couple options on the north end up along 13th Avenue. We looked at a couple options down on the south end. For those of us old enough to remember the railroad that used to run on the back side of the mall, there's that green strip. That's where the railroad used to go under I-29, or actually I-29 went over the railroad. So there's that green strip there. We also looked at a couple options out on the east side, on the west side along 42nd as well. And kind of went through an evaluation process, not only looking at new options, but kind of saying, hey, is there anything we could do with what we have to make that operate a little better? And if you haven't been out to West Acres and watched the buses come through there, I'd encourage MAP board members to do that. I think it's important to understand how the transit system is using that facility, and I think until you've actually been there, it's tough to understand maybe some of the concerns the mall have, maybe some of the concerns the riders have. It's pretty congested, and now with the Best Buy redevelopment, I think it's getting even more so. So we looked at an option. It's like, hey, could we tuck in more buses? Could we do more with what we have? And it's really difficult because, now Best Buy, whereas before that was a storage entrance to Sears, that area between where the hub is now and where Best Buy is, that used to be a storage entrance for Sears. Well, now it's kind of the garage where they, put your speakers and stuff in. So, you still have that gap. You're still stretching buses out. I don't know, Julie and Matt and Michael, we were all out there for our open house, and you kind of see firsthand it's plugged up out there. So we looked also at a couple other options, kind of getting away from the main entrance. This is on the south end. Again, that green strip. You can see Savers and the ball yard down to the southeast there. That to kind of give you a reference, the old Best Buy site is what's on the west end. East end of the screen there. So we looked at a couple options that would use that green strip. We looked at both a 6-bus option and a 10-bus option. Again, we want to account for growth. We don't want to get in a situation where 8-9 years from now, MapBus is having to look at a new site. So we looked at both a 6 and a 10-bus operation there. And again, giving these things more life, we tried to develop, some more concepts for these, some green space, making sure people understand that, it's more than just lines on concrete. We tried to give it a little bit of a life and an image. And so you can see we tried to really draw a connection. We worked with the mall. They're generally flexible to try to make sure that we're, making a good pedestrian connection from, any options that we look at into the mall. And they're open to that. They were, I think, very willing to work with MapBus and work on that. We looked at another option. This is really almost the same option as we have before. It's just a different way of laying out the buses and how they, park and transfer passengers. But again, same kind of a thing, trying to really just develop a green space concept. And here you can see we've got a little more green space in that island between the hub and the mall, whereas here it would retain parking. So we left a number of options on the table. So as MapBus moves into design, they can kind of pick and choose and work with the mall on how they want to proceed there. This is more of a 3D looking at those options on the south end, so it kind of gives you a perspective of on the left-hand side from the mall looking out to the transit area, and on the other from the transit area looking in. So potentially some covered walkways, make sure the passengers and other users can get, and it might actually benefit mall users who park out in that area. They can use this improved access as well. We looked at an option. We looked at a couple options on the east side, west side on 42nd. One was dismissed fairly early. The one that we did retain, we called option 3. Used that parking. This is south of 15th, kind of right across the street from Buffalo Wild Wings and the Delta Marriott Hotel. Using that area for a hub. Again, we laid out both a 6 and a 10 bus option. I'm only showing the 6 bus option here. But again, just kind of looking at, could we get buses in there a little bit more conveniently? We're a little bit removed from the mall, but again, we kind of tried to develop improved connections, trying to protect parking. It's precious to the mall. And the mall also has agreements with its tenants. I mean, we always kind of try to poke at the mall and how much parking do they need, but, they literally have, agreements with their tenants. They have to provide a certain amount of parking. They can't just remove parking arbitrarily. So we had to be respectful for what the mall was wanting, and a number of the options we developed use parking. This one uses, I believe, about 150 parking spaces altogether. So, I mean, they are willing to give and take a little bit, but this was option 3. You can see here we did some 3D renderings. On the left-hand side, you can see kind of looking at the hub on the top there, towards the mall. And, one of the nice features about option 3 is that, it really provides a nice gateway. If you think about the hotels and the restaurants on the west side of 42nd, it's kind of a no man's land, to get across 42nd. And whereas now you create a feature, it's a destination that kind of breaks up that. Same way with option 2. One of the things we liked about option 2, when you think about where it's located, we've talked about, or there's been discussion about, what will happen with that corner of 17th and 38th, obviously Savers and the Ball Yard, and that as that lease runs out, I think the mall has ideas about some changes there. So if you put the transit center in that area, then it's a real nice stepping stone between that potentially commercial, higher density development in the mall. So we felt like the options we developed worked from an operational perspective, but also, tried to fit into the context of that area pretty well. So we looked at that in detail. We had some open houses. We're collecting some surveys now from the ridership. We did develop some cost estimates for those 3 options that we felt were probably the most technically feasible. Again, these are planning levels, so there's certainly some variability here, and these are probably on the high side to protect against any contingencies going forward. But option 3 on the west side was the lower cost option, whereas option 2C were the higher cost option. And you'll notice the road improvement line item there. The mall did ask that we calculate the potential to improve some of the access roads in and around the mall. I mean, obviously those buses take a pretty good whack at those roads. Now, to me, from MapBus's perspective, City of Fargo, this is a negotiating piece of the puzzle. I mean, certainly, you're probably not necessarily going to have to be responsible for all those improvements, but this could be, a negotiating leverage for, maybe how much of those, would actually be the responsibility of MapBus and the City of Fargo. So we did develop some planning level cost estimates on that. Sorry, Matt, I'm going more than 10 minutes. Moving quickly, the Ground Transportation Center was another area that we looked at. And, part of what we tried to do there is, kind of preserve the existing footprint. We did take a look at, the graphic up in the upper right-hand corner. We did take a look downtown. I mean, there's a lot of things changing in both downtown Moorhead and downtown Fargo. It's tough to find a footprint like we have at the Ground Transportation Center right now. When you think about it, we tried to identify locations. That circle you see is about a half-mile concentric circle, quarter mile, I'm sorry, concentric circle. It's just really tough to find another place that you could start over. Additionally, You know, we probably can't put this thing in Moorhead because then we're pushing a number of buses on the Fargo side into Moorhead. But to respect the Moorhead buses, we can't push it too much further into Fargo under the current operational concept because those buses need to change passengers and get back into Moorhead. So I don't want to say that the hands were tied, but we kind of felt like after we sort of, you know, developed some very preliminary concepts for the site, then looked around based on what we thought we were going to need, we just didn't feel like there was a lot of options out there. We looked at a number of options, I think 12 or 13 altogether. We kind of sifted those down to a handful, and what we really came back to, if you can envision the GTC, we really came back to a number that would be able to use the existing footprint, the existing building of the Ground Transportation Center, but really focused on, number one, trying to improve conditions on the deck. There's a number of safety concerns. You know, those buses back up, pull forward. You know, that's a real concern from an operations perspective. You know, more capacity on that deck. I mean, you've got between 9 and 11 buses coming in and out of there every 15 to 30 minutes. So trying to find an option that would give us a little bit more space on the deck. And so here you can see a series of options. These were our 4 options, our concept 4 options. We looked at a number of options that really, you know, tried to just reuse that deck and how the buses come in and out of there. In all of our Series 4 options, which, as I'll mention in a minute, are probably our preferred or most highly prioritized option, requires some use of the city-owned parking lot to the south. We just need that space to get us to where we need to be, not only for today, but for growth. Jefferson is coming downtown. You know, there's always a training bus down there. There's always a backup bus down there, a breakdown bus. So there's a lot of buses down there. So that's something I think the city will need to take into consideration as they move forward is for a lot of these options that were higher on the list is using a little to a lot of that parking lot to the south for some bus parking. 4E is really more of a long-term. You get quite a bit of capacity there. Probably looking more along the lines of 4D. That said, we did look at a number of options. I think the term we bandied back and forth was kind of the nuclear option. We did look at some options that would say, what if we just, you know, took it off, scraped it off, and started all over? I can tell you there's certainly some flexibility there to do that, particularly since the city owns, you know, not only the GTC, the municipal court, and the parking lot to the south. I mean, the city certainly has the ingredients to do something creative there. We didn't prioritize those as something that would need to be moved forward with in the short term, but in the long term, there are certainly some options and potential to do just that. So we did look at a number of options like that. You know, one of the considerations now, of course, is you've got a very old parking deck underneath of the Ground Transportation Center. So since this was a planning study, we didn't really have the budget or the scope to get into some of the engineering of, you know, how much could you put on top of that existing underground parking garage. But long term, you know, if that garage gets replaced, if you know, replace that, expand it, I mean, certainly there are a number of options up top that you could coordinate in with that overall facility. Again, another of our probably less nuclear options, you know, of trying to look at that site and do some things a little bit differently. The series that we developed, the 4C, 4D, 4E option, we did have our project architect do some 3D renderings like we did for some of the other hubs. Again, this is helpful for the public, for the stakeholders to understand, well, what is this thing going to look like when it's all said and done? So here you can see really just how those buses might look. You know, we'll need to, you know, do some canopies. We'll need to, you know, do some deck changes and improvements. You know, just gives the public and you as decision makers an understanding of what this thing might look like when it's all said and done. We did, in the end, develop a cost estimate that more closely fits the option 4 series. So we're looking at about $2.5 million. That's again planning level, so it's on the high side. We've got some decent contingencies built into that. But it also includes the accommodation. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, it includes accommodation to, you know, do a pretty significant renovation internally. We went through a number of options for how you could, you know, mix and match that internal space at the GTC. It's a real savior, the space that you do have downtown. When you look at some of the capacity, the staffing crunch you're having out at the transit garage, how nice is it that you can move some staff down there? You've got that space, so we worked through a lot of that. So this kind of shows, what our cost estimate of 2.5 plus or minus is based on is kind of the larger, the 4D deck improvements, as well as the internal renovation. I believe the city is proceeding currently with the design of some of those elements. As we move to the Metro Transit Garage, one of the things that we did, I talked a little bit about some of the ridership analysis, looking at, how are people using the system. We also spent actually quite a bit of time looking at growth projections. We were at, capacity or near capacity at the Metro Transit Garage only 10 or 12 years after it was constructed. So we really wanted to make sure that we took a good hard look at the future. So one of the things that we looked real long and hard at was our growth projections for vehicles. So we looked at peer systems. We looked at, a number of different metrics to measure, how the system has changed over the past decade, try to figure out what rate of that growth do we think we'll realize over the next 20 years to try to get us to a number. You can see it's difficult to see. We went with a medium growth scenario is what MetroCog and MapBus were most comfortable with. That puts the system at about 63 fixed route buses in 20 years. They're at about 42 today. We took that number and then we compared both it and the medium growth revenue miles and compared it to peers, both peers that you have today as systems and then peers that would have the same population in 2025 and then 2045 to match your MetroCog's demographic projections, and that number is pretty close. So we felt like, okay, that's probably a safe number. In 2004, we grew the system by 20% because that's what FTA said to do. Clearly that number wasn't big enough. So we went a little bit deeper this time around to make sure that, MapBus isn't in this same situation in 10 years, that whatever you make that investment in is going to hold those vehicles going forward. The other thing we looked at, and I collapsed that slide, I think I'm going to just bring it up because I want to show it. The other thing that we looked at, I think I have it, yeah. The other thing that we looked at was staffing, and we did a pretty detailed evaluation to try to make sure that we were going to get those numbers right, because staffing is a big part of it. Now I hope it comes up again. Yes, okay. So we also looked at staffing, looking at where we're at in the baseline, and Matt, team, this doesn't reflect the changes we talked about on Monday or Tuesday, but I think the bottom line is you look at where they're at today, 126, that's both, City of Moorhead, City of Fargo staff, plus a lot of contracted staff, drivers, dispatchers, trainers, blah, blah, blah. So you look at that number today and where they're going to be, that's a pretty big jump, to operate that system. So we also wanted to take a deeper dive into what are we going to have for office space, because that's where you get a lot of crunch in terms of, mechanics, in terms of the drivers, in terms of some of the contracted operators. So we really wanted to make sure, not only looking at what do we need to store, that also drives what we need for maintenance, but also looking at, how many people are we going to have running around there as well. So we wanted to take a real good look. So when we started looking at the Metro Transit Garage, one of the things we did is, looked at, space by, functional area, and this doesn't include parking, which is a consideration as well. So you can see today, and there are some areas that are probably a little bit over. We just generalized at 100%, but you can see for each of those functional areas, if we did nothing, within the next couple of years, things like fleet services are really going to start to have a real crunch. If you take it another 5 years and don't do anything, things like administration and contractor, fleet services, they're well over 150% of capacity. So that's really getting to be quite a crunch for MapBus. And I'd say the administrative number is a little high because that doesn't account for the fact that we can move some people downtown. So what we did then is we went through a pretty exhaustive process of looking at options for how we might expand the Metro Transit Garage. We looked at some very operational, sort of functional scenarios, but in the end came down to really 3 scenarios that were fortunately able to really use that existing footprint where you are today up in the sort of the public works complex that the City of Fargo has on the north side. So we looked at a number of options. Option 1 is is, the purple areas are kind of, storage and maintenance. The light blue area would be administration. The orange area on the south end would be fleet services. So if you can envision that space today, and I should have started with what's there today, this is a pretty significant change over where you're at today. We looked at an option 2, which is very similar. The difference between option 1 and option 2 is that the administrative space in option 2 would go away. You would have it in a completely different location. We would use the existing administrative space, which is just north of the parking lot on the southeast corner of that graphic. You can see goes to fleet storage, and the administrative space kicks over into a 2-story building attached to fleet services. And then we looked at a variation, option 3, which is really just a variation of option 1. But we felt like we could preserve using that existing footprint. You'll notice in all options, the parking along 24th, we restructure that street to get some more staff parking because we're really limited in the amount of parking we have on that site. You might ask, why didn't we use that parking lot and try to maybe come up with some other parking options? Well, there's stormwater storage underneath that existing parking lot at the Metro Transit Garage that ties back to the original site design way back in 2005. So we were kind of limited in, not wanting to get into the expense of having to modify that. So we went through and looked at a number of options. Now the strategy here is all the options we looked at really probably between $11.5 and $13 million. So then the question is, do we need to spend all of that at once? So what we looked at is, what if we built, going back to our original table, what if we built everything in 4 years? You could see that a number of functional areas would actually be, we'd have too much space, probably too soon. It's like, well, what if we waited 10 years and did everything in 10 years? Well, we'd probably start to reach a little bit of a break point. So what we came up with was sort of an implementation phase of the option 1, which would start with, basically breaking away the fleet services and building a standalone fleet services building just south of the current, just east of the current Metro Transit Garage. North is to the right here. And then preserving the administrative space, which is in the bottom right-hand side of the building, and then phasing into, you can see here, then phasing it, the next phase would be, because fleet services, as you saw earlier, was the big space crunch. Then we would phase into expanding to meet some more fleet storage needs. Again, we're still saving that administrative space because with some shifts between existing spaces, we're able to continue to function in that area. And then long-term, you kind of kick back to this phase eventually here, where you move the administrative building over. You're then able to add a little bit of additional storage on at the end. So really a phased approach of being able to do it incrementally. And who knows, after you do this, if the projections are a little bit light on staffing, maybe you can stay with this for a longer period of time, but at least gives you that flexibility for investment over time. So then we went back to some of our original tables, tried to figure out, the top table there looks at, what if you added the fleet services in 2022 and then did a full expansion in 2037? For the most part, you'd be okay. The administrative space starts to get a little tight. Again, that doesn't necessarily account for the ability to kick some people downtown. What if you waited another 12 years and did this thing in 2027 in that same phase? We could probably reach some break points, particularly in fleet services by 2027. So we felt like the top band, where you would kind of maybe try to do this first fleet services addition and then reno that space, in 5 to 6 years, and then do that second kick out maybe in that 10 to 12 year range, would really be the best bang for the buck. And we had our architect just do some, kind of some 3D rendering, so you can see on the bottom that's kind of what we have up there today. And then the top, you can kind of see, what on the right-hand side at full build, you'd see that would be kind of that 2-story administrative office that would kind of be built to the east of the current building. To the right, you can see looking from south to north at the building as it would be kicked out and expanded. Here you can see, kind of looking from the north, looking to the south and the right image. So kind of just gives you a sense of how it would play out. That image on the top right kind of shows you that entrance to the Fleet Services building. So that is it in a nutshell, and I realize I went a little bit long, but as I put this together, Matt, I didn't realize how I was going to do all this again. So it's a lot of information. But with that, I'd be happy to back up, answer any questions. I don't know, Michael, do you have any thoughts or additions?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Questions for Wade? Okay. I believe you're looking for a recommendation that this study be passed on to the cities. Is that correct, Lori, Julie?
Yes, we're looking for an action to receive this study today.
Okay, so if there are no questions, we'd be looking for a motion to recommend the study be moved on to the cities of Moorhead and Fargo. We have a first.
I'll second.
First and second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion's carried. All right, thank you, Wade. The next item on our agenda is the October 10th minutes. This is attachment 2. Hopefully you've had a chance to review those minutes, and if so, we'd entertain a motion at this point to approve those minutes.
Move for approval.
First? Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, 2C, proposed changes to service hours for Route 6 and 9, attachment 3. Lori.
Thank you. So Route 6 and Route 9 were added in 2014. Route 6 travels through Dilworth, and Route 9 serves southeast Moorhead, the Sanford Clinic, Menard, Sam's Club, Horizon Middle School area. A few months ago, we did some ridership analysis and bus stop analysis because we noted that on our operational reports that Route 9 in Southeast Moorhead is not doing very well for ridership, and the loss of Sam's Club as a destination has also affected the ridership on Route 9. And seeing that it continues to decrease, would there be a better utilization of that bus? That bus is shared between the two routes so that they are interlined. One bus does a half-hour trip in Dilworth and then the half-hour trip in Southeast Moorhead, so they're connected, and so you really can't disconnect them unless you're adding service to some other area of town to utilize that bus. So when we looked at all the trends and the ridership, it occurred to us that the first trip in the morning on the Southeast route is 0. When we looked at a week-long boarding, there was no one riding at that time of the morning. It's like 6:10 in the morning. And the very last trip of the night, there were only 3 rides in a week, and so it was not being utilized at the beginning and at the end of the trips. So we approached Dilworth to see, would you be interested in adding service to Route 6 and taking those 2 trips off 9, moving them to 6, because Route 6's ridership is continuing to grow each year and doing well, and we've had requests from citizens for more evening service on Route 6. So they were interested in that, and so then we went out and did a survey of the passengers. We did both an online and on the bus survey to ask passengers if we made some changes like this, how would they affect you? Would it be positive or negative? And we got some mixed results from that as far as, whether it was positive or negative. It seemed that our 3 regular riders on Route 9 did complete the survey and might be affected by that late night one, the last trip of the night being moved. But most of the comments were positive, that they'd like to see more service on 6 and more night service on 6. So we looked at several alternatives on how we could shift those. Of course, there's always the do-nothing alternative. We can continue service as it is today. And then we looked at whether we should move the first trip of the day and the last trip of the day to the Dilworth end of the route. We should swap around some hours, and basically we came up with alternative number 1 as our recommendation, and that's moving that first trip and last trip to the end of Route 6 so that it goes an hour later at night, 2 hours later at night. So instead of going from 6:10 a.m. to 7:10, from 6:10 a.m., I can talk, till 6:10 p.m., it would start at 7:10 a.m. and go till 6:40 p.m. Gotta find my own recommendations. So it would go later at night by 2 trips. So that's my recommendation to you, to recommend to the councils of Dilworth and Moorhead, is that we take 2 trips off of 9 and move them to Route 6 and add them to the end of Route 6 so that we extend service into the evening. One of the complaints we do get frequently is that if you miss your last trip to Route 6, if you miss your transfer at the Walmart in Dilworth, that's a long walk into Dilworth. And so that's one of the reasons why they wanted more late service, is because it ends fairly early. If you're trying to get home from work and you miss that last trip, it's caused some problems for passengers in the regular, complaints and things that we monitor on the system. So, just for your information, the Transit Development Plan did make some recommendations on changes to these 2 routes, and we did look at those in RE/MAX, our planning software, to see if any of those would work. And, we can't really disconnect 6 and 9, but you could take and add those trips to other routes and interline more buses. But it gets very complicated for passengers to understand when the bus all of a sudden changes to another route, and you don't know which route it's going to go to next, because a piece of the trip is each divvied up to different routes. So we're not recommending that, even though it did come out as a recommendation in the Transit Development Plan. And trying to change Route 9 to connect to the Marriott was a recommendation, but it's such a long route, we couldn't, there's not enough time on it to make that connection and be able to transfer at the Marriott and transfer at the Walmart to connect with Route 6. So in conclusion, we are recommending that at this time that we make this change between the 2 routes. We see in the future, as Center Avenue continues to develop, as there's some residential buildings being put up there, and as the 5-year plan recommended, as Center Avenue develops, then Route 6 could be changed to be a route that travels through Dilworth and downtown to the Ground Transportation Center, and then it would disconnect from Route 9. So as that develops, that would be a future recommendation. And then Route 9, the Southeast Moorhead, rather than having a fixed route bus in that area, we would recommend something like Fargo does on NDSU campus with Tap Ride, where it becomes an on-call, demand-responsive service in that zone. We identify that zone, and people could go call up on their phone and get a ride in that area. So, as we look further down the road, there are other solutions to that that we see coming as more service, more potential sites develop along Center Avenue. So the recommended motion is to recommend to the Moorhead City Council and the Dilworth City Council that those 2 trips from Route 9, first trip, last trip, be moved to Route 6, to the end of Route 6 for effective January 1st of 2019.
Questions for Lori? If not, we'd entertain Lori's motion.
So moved.
Go first. A second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion's carried. Thank you, Lori. Moving on to item 2D, the 2019 transit service contract with Dilworth. This is attachment 4. Lori.
Thank you. We have an annual contract with the City of Dilworth for providing transit service to their residents, and so this would be the 2019 contract. And we provide fixed route MAT bus service through Route 6. We also provide senior ride and paratransit service through this contract. And so this 2019 contract is based on the 2019 budget that was put together for the City of Moorhead for consideration. And it does reflect the changes to Route 6 and 9, so it adds those 2 trips to the Dilworth contract. And so the draft contract is provided for you here, and basically Exhibit A is the computation of the service and service hours. Again, it would be 6:40 a.m. to 7:10 p.m. is when Route 6 would go through Dilworth. now that I have it in front of me with real hours, those hours, Monday through Friday. We would not change the hours on Saturday. We would continue those at 7:40 a.m. to 6:10 p.m. And then the cost and Dilworth share and the use of the bus and things is outlined here. Total cost, maximum cost would be about $31,000. If all, it just depends on ridership, because the fare box revenue, as ridership increases, the fare box revenue decreases the cost to Dilworth. And so there's a range there. We expect it to be around $27,000. And I believe that they budgeted 29 in Dilworth to cover those costs, should this recommendation be approved. So the recommendation is to, the recommended motion is to recommend to the City of Dilworth and the City of Moorhead approval of this contract for 2019.
Questions for Lori? Okay, hearing none, Lori's motion, recommended motion is at the bottom of her memorandum. We have a first? A second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, on to 2E, the 2019 Joint Powers Agreement with Valley Senior Services and Dilworth, Attachment 5. Lori.
Thank you. Again, this is an annual contract that we have, or a joint powers agreement with Valley Senior Services, which is operated from the Fargo Park District. They are the contractor that runs Metro Senior Ride. And so under our joint powers agreement, they operate the Metro Senior Ride service for us 7:40 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. And so this is the 2019 joint powers agreement. And basically, it's the same hours and service levels as was in 2018. There's a budget increase of 4.8% to that contract, so the contract would be $149,471. 85% of that is covered by the MnDOT, the state of Minnesota, under a grant agreement, and then 15% is paid for between the two cities and includes fare box revenue to decrease that amount. So under the draft agreement that is attached, there is a budget, so that you can see one of the exhibits here has a budget, exhibit attachment C, that shows the different costs involved and the revenues and things that are generated. Interesting enough with Senior Ride is that the 15% match that the state requires, we actually get enough money in revenue to overmatch that, and that is used then to help pay for MAP paratransit service. So that's a nice plus that occurs under that state contract. They allow us to do that and decrease those costs. So the increase of 4.8% is partially due to some administrative services that Moorhead was not paying for in the past. We're not paying for accounting services and computer services and some of the administrative costs. And so there is an allocation of those based on ridership that was put into the budget, so that the Park District doesn't feel that Fargo is supplementing Moorhead on the administrative side of this system. So that's the reason for that 4.8% increase, basically. So the recommended motion is to recommend to the Moorhead City Council and Dilworth City Council approval of the joint powers agreement for 2019.
Questions for Lori? Hearing none, her recommended motion is the bottom of her memorandum. As we have a first. We have a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, moving on to our agenda, informational items, 3A, which is the proposed 2019 meeting dates, attachment 6. Lori.
In an attempt not to move meetings around and get them on your schedule so that you can plan to be here, Julie and I have put together the 2019 meeting schedule, taking into consideration that there are some deadlines for grants and also some transit association conferences that have been competing with our regular monthly meeting. We've adjusted the meeting schedule a little bit. So we continue to meet every other month at 8 o'clock in the morning on the third Wednesday, except for when in July it'd be the second Wednesday, and in September it would be the fourth Wednesday to work around those deadlines. So that's the recommendation for the 2019 meeting schedule.
Okay, any questions or thoughts? I think it helps having it laid out in advance. Everybody's good with it? Hearing lots of, or seeing lots of nods, so I think we'll go ahead with that, Lori.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the operations reports and college ridership, which is attachment 7. Matthew and Lori.
Lori, you want to start with Moorhead routes first, and then I'll move into Fargo?
Sure. Moorhead's ridership continues to grow. As you can see, in the month of October, we were up 22.98% when compared to the previous year. And so, that's really important because, we expanded service in July of 17. So we are now a year past that first year of expanded service, and we're continuing to grow. So the new service levels we added on Saturdays and evenings are being utilized, and the routes are continuing to increase ridership. And so we see some good growth there. Our on-time performance is down a little bit. We try to get, our goal is for 90% on-time performance. A lot of that is due to Route 3 being on a detour, a long-term detour due to the 21st Street grade separation. And then we're monitoring Route 4's decrease in on-time performance as well, trying to see, what's happening there, to see if our contractor can help us with improving that on-time performance, if it's because the bus is there early or if there's delays for certain reasons. I know Route 4 was also affected by the detour, and so we did make some temporary changes to that route. So hopefully we'll see improvement on on-time performance on Route 4. But otherwise, we're exceeding our 90% on a couple of routes as well, so that looks good.
In Fargo, good news is we're up about 12% so far for ridership. In October. A couple of things to pay attention to. Route 13 and Route 13U, they were pretty heavily impacted with the construction on 10th Street this year. I think with Route 13U being down 15%, it's not only the construction, but also the U32 apartment complex that's up on 32nd Avenue North there. We're seeing quite a bit of ridership up there. Julie and I have talked about in the future potentially looking at Route 13 as a 15-minute route and just eliminating 13U, doing something similar to what we've done on Route 15. So now as this data, like Lori had stated, we're a full year into our route changes and we're seeing these trends continue. So that kind of tells us we need to take a look at 13 and see what we plan to do with that in the future. Route 18 is up pretty significantly as well. Again, we're a year past converting it from a 30-minute route to a 90-minute route. People are starting to get used to that route pattern, realizing they don't have to make multiple transfers to get to where they want to go into South Fargo. So I think that initially was met with some resistance, but is slowly starting to win over the passengers. And then Route 20, of course, is also one of the routes that's been heavily affected by construction along 13th Avenue there in front of Walmart in West Fargo. I don't believe that's done yet. It's improving, but it's still being slightly problematic. That does contribute pretty significantly to our on-time performance. In general, our on-time performance in Fargo is up. And it's up, about 9%, I suppose, with the exception of 13U being impacted and Route 20 being pretty heavily impacted with those construction pieces in there. But we've been working with the contractor quite a bit to ensure that the on-time performance and the ridership is being recorded properly. Not a lot of changes on NDSU. Generally speaking, the ridership is up with the exception of Route 34. Not overly surprising. I know NDSU is moving some offices around that were utilized pretty heavily on Route 34 over the last year. So a less than 2% decrease on that. Not overly concerning. And then Route 35 and Tapride, as you know, 35 was suspended January 1st of 2018 for the implementation of Tapride, which has been pretty successful up on NDSU campus. And I have done a few more rides on Tapride than we have on 35. We're able to expand that service area and get people to where they're going at night for that safe ride. I think they feel quite a bit more comfortable. So we're hoping NDSU will want to continue that service with us. And moving into Link FM, Last year, I don't know if you remember, because we do talk quite a bit at these meetings, but we were talking about some of the ridership. We weren't sure if it was accurate or not. I think this is a clear picture of what's actually happening on Link FM. The 115% increase, I don't think is actually an increase so much as the ridership is being recorded properly, because it is a fare free. Some of our contractor employees were under the understanding that they didn't need to tally those rides. And so we're glad that we were able to hold off on that and take a look at Link FM now here a year later and kind of see what that ridership really is. So all in all, we are on track for a 3 to 4% increase in ridership between Fargo and Moorhead for 2018 over 2017, which is good news. And then I didn't touch my screen. Okay. Collisions, preventable collisions and fixed route are down slightly in 2018. Again, working with contractor, trying to make sure that we are getting the best training that we can get from them into the driver's hands, and working on route alignments and things like that, taking away some of the problematic areas that we've had. Mistrips are slightly up. Again, that is for many different reasons. We have contractor error, we have mechanical, we have weather. We go through those the best we can, but we do monitor those on a daily basis, and we are working with our contractor for any that are designated as a contractor error for a missed route, or a mistrip, excuse me. And then moving into complaints and incidents, or our feedback section, if you will. They're still coming in pretty heavily. With any growth in any system, we would expect to see that complaints or incidents, again, feedback, we're going to get more of it as our ridership increases. As we get new ridership, there are policy concerns, questions, just all kinds of different things like that. And so we do our best to go through and take a look at substantiated and unsubstantiated. Not a lot of huge changes on either one of those as far as feedback goes. We've had quite a few more fall and injury reports on board our vehicles with some of the newer drivers, again, working with the contractor for training on that, ensuring that people are grabbing onto the handrails before the buses are departing, or that they're seated if they're an elderly person or visibly disabled. And then,
So, Matt, a question on this. So is that within the bus? So if somebody slips on the outside of the bus, is that counted, or is it anytime, or how does that work?
so 90% of the time it is on board the vehicle or at our GTC facility in one of our facilities. There are a couple of bleed over ones where people are exiting the vehicle or possibly boarding the vehicle. That's kind of a gray area as to are they on the bus or are they not, but the drivers do continue to report that. So about 90% are on board our vehicles.
The nature of the complaints, are they more driver related? Are they timing issues? What are they?
Yeah. So the majority of the complaints that we are getting right now are two things. They're actually both of what you just said. About half of them are customer complaints regarding the de-escalation tactics with drivers and that personal communication. With what's been happening in the Fargo-Moorhead area, and people tend to I call it violate my personal space. I have this bubble, like when I talk to someone that I don't know, and that happens quite a bit with drivers. It makes them uneasy, and that's a lot of times where we see customer complaints come in because it gets read wrong. And so working with the drivers on how to talk with customers, things like that is what we're doing. So that's about half of those complaints. The other half, when it comes to timing or policies, are detours. People have a very hard time understanding that, we do the best we can when it comes to a detour, and we want the routes to be on time. But unfortunately, for some of the routes in these larger construction areas that are being impacted, Route 20, for example, Route 13, there really isn't a good option for us to get around that. And so we drive through that construction area, which makes the bus late. It's not really the driver's fault. It's not really anyone's fault. The road improvements need to be done. And, sometimes people have a hard time understanding why we can't keep that route on time, because they may want us to alter the route so that it can stay on time, but then we're affecting many other passengers who would no longer have service. And so we're trying to do that constant juggling act, if you will. I hope that makes sense. It was kind of a long explanation. So,
is it anticipated that we may lose some ridership because of that, and then have to try to win them back?
Yeah, you always run the risk whenever on-time performance is under 90% that you're going to lose some ridership. That's generally the choice ridership. It's the ridership that is choosing to use us over the ones who don't have a lot of other options. But, you know, again, a lot of those choice riders are very good about understanding the construction areas and understanding that they need to hop on a bus 30 minutes earlier. And that's where that frequency becomes so important for any of our routes. If I tell a passenger, hey, that bus only runs once an hour, now you need to leave an hour earlier to get to where you're going on time, whereas a route like 15, for example, that's every 15 minutes, that's a huge incentive, which is why we're looking at Route 13, potentially some other routes. I know Lori, I think, has looked at a couple. So frequency is one of our biggest advocates for winning ridership. People don't want to have to wait 30 minutes or 60 minutes or leave 30 or 60 minutes earlier. It's not so much the length of the trip on board the vehicle, it's whether or not they're going to be able to get to where they're going on time. Yeah. And then, of course, security services down at GTC. We are continuing to see an increase on that. Julie and I and Lori have all been working on plans to try and address some of that with both our administrative people on both sides, whether that's increasing security, working with PD. We have been working with the homeless outreach people. Now Moorhead has employed one, or Clay County, excuse me, not Moorhead, very similar to what Fargo has done. And so we've been communicating with them on a pretty regular basis. Anytime that we are having concerns with passengers and we have their information, we do reach out to them, and they help kind of bridge that gap of communication so that the expectations are met. Other than that, going down into the blue area, social media, MapUs.com with the new launch of the website last year, we did not get any good data, so we look great, but we have been seeing an increased trend in our in the use of that, which I think is pretty evident when you look at our phone calls at GTC especially. You know, phone calls at GTC for the dispatchers used to be around 150 a day. Now they're down to about 98. So I think that's pretty telling as far as the technology, the app, the website, our ability to push that information out in real time. People know that they can go there and get that information so much quicker than calling in and waiting on hold to speak with someone. Again, there's the MapUs app. That one is a 42% increase. Facebook is staying pretty constant. Twitter is up a little bit. And then our rider alerts, we don't have the information for that, but that 3,000 mark is right about where we've been for the last year. So, any questions on that before moving forward? I know I go through that really fast, but it's a lot of numbers. All right, and then into college ridership. NDSU, we've already kind of discussed. Lori, if you want to jump in on the Moorhead ones?
Yeah, in October, Concordia ridership was down 7%. M-State was up 35%, MSUM down 6%, NDSU up 3%, NDSCS down 40%. So we had a 3% increase in October on college ridership. So, you know, that's on the uptrend, some of them more than others, but I think we're doing good. I know they're at MSUM doing a lot of outreach to their students, saying, hey, remember, you know, you can ride free with your ID, and keeping up that promotional piece of why that's a benefit. We were at M-State for some of their orientation and made some presentation to students, and so that was, you know, beneficial for the college ridership as well. So, you know, any of the colleges want us to come on campus and do anything, we're happy to do that in promoting transit. I know we have a promotion in January for the colleges again, as we start a new semester, to get on board with our radio station and just get in everyone's face and say we're here. Hey, don't be worrying about that car not parking and not starting and scraping those windows. We have MapBus, so we'll continue to promote the college ridership on a regular basis.
Any questions for Lori or Matt on the ridership reports? If not, we'll move on to item 3C, the paratransit mobility management update, attachment 8. Sean.
Thank you. So for October Compared to 2017, our ridership increased 10.31%. Our revenue hours increased 7.25%, and our mileage increased 21.22%. Passengers per hour increased 2.86%. However, on-time performance did go down 5.44%. And I attribute that drop in on-time performance due to a couple of issues. We had 4 new drivers starting in October, all at the same time. And we also were trying some different things with our scheduling. So that kind of wasn't probably the best time to try some things with our scheduling with 4 new drivers starting, but that accounted for quite a few late pickups for a few days in a row. But we're working to improve that now, and I think we've done a pretty good job of getting back on track. Our queue time tracking for people waiting in the queue to be answered by a reservation is, our goal is 95% under 3 minutes, and we were at 94% for October. However, we did meet our goal of 99% of our calls answered within 5 minutes. So, applications, so far in 2018, I've processed 256 applications. That includes people who are approved either fully or conditionally, temporarily, or denied applications. So far in 2018, we've also processed close to 300 discount fare applications. For the pilot program for Sunday service for Para for Moorhead and Dilworth, in October, there were 5 trips counted for that. And then we also did hire a new reservationist in October, so she's been here just over a month, and she's doing pretty good. So we're still in the process of getting her trained in.
Question on the applications. Are these new applications, or do you reprocess every year?
Nope, these are all new applications.
Any other questions for Sean? Okay, hearing none. Any other business? Okay, hearing none, we are officially adjourned. Thank you, everyone.